Welcome tonight. We're so very glad to have you. Welcome to all of you online. We're so glad that you're joining with us as well to be a part of Wednesday Night Alive. If you were at home tonight, I hope you had a great dinner, because we had a really good dinner here tonight. No doubt about it, absolutely. It was delicious. I saw how much y'all were all enjoying it. I have mine in a to-go box when I get through tonight, so I will find out. The CLC was just great to have it packed. Tonight I officially declare COVID over. To see the crowd out tonight, yes, I was like, we've had people all over the building, and that was just really so fun and feeling so good. But if you didn't get to be out, we're glad to have you with us as well tonight and being a part of this.
If you're at home with COVID, we will pray for you.
That's right. I declared it over, but I guess maybe that was the case now. Welcome. Let's bow for a word of prayer. Oh God, it is so good to be able to come together as a family of faith, to be able to laugh and to love, to encourage, and to be able to be together to worship you, to open our hearts and minds to your Spirit in our lives. As we come and study your word, we ask that you would give us vision, that we might know where it is you're calling us to go and who you're calling us to be. May we hear you speak to our hearts tonight. Amen. You know, John Wesley was such a fascinating guy. Someone who was very energetic. I mean, when you think about the amount of miles he traveled, wasn't it 250,000 miles he rode on horseback? I mean, just always, on the horse, reading, writing his sermons, going and preaching, usually multiple times per day. And I can't help but believe that some of those were reruns. You can't write that many.
Tweak it from church to
That's right.
church.
You can't write that many sermons, but he was always on the go and just an amazing guy. Very disciplined in his life, and that's why we're all known as Methodist, is because he was so methodical, and he was methodical in the way he lived his life. And that's one of those kind of things I think sometimes it's easy to let slide, and let's forget how important it is to be disciplined, methodical, in making sure that we're growing all of our life. We are called to be growing all of our life. And I thought it was interesting, John Wesley, January the 1st, 1783, he wrote in his diary, "Whether this be my last year or no, I intend to make it my best." I love that. Whether this be my last year or no, I intend to make it my best. You need to remember he was born in 1703. So he made that comment when he was 80 years old. At 80 years old, he's going, will this year be my last year or no, I intend to make it my best. It doesn't matter whether you're in your 20s and 30s or your 70s, 80s, or 100s. God is calling us to still be growing and to intend to make this our best. I like that. Why would I want to make this year the best? And to do that is to be really open to believe that God is still doing new things in our lives and in the world. And I believe God is doing new things in our lives always if we are open and we are wanting to follow. So this class that we're starting tonight really is all about what does it mean to be growing and letting God do something new in your life and in the world around us. And so we hope each week we're going to look at scriptures. I hope we can look at different illustrations and stories that maybe can inspire us and encourage us to say, how am I open to letting God lead us into new ways? So that's what we're going to be about, and we're going to enjoy doing that. And I will probably come back many times and refer to, if this be my last year or no, I intend to make it my best. And just even as an aside kind of on that, I liked it so much, the fact that John Wesley was 80 years old when he was saying that. But I tell you, just recently, there have been so many people that I know and have related to our family who have been so young who have passed away. some good friends of my son Paul and his wife Krista, and father of 4, got an infection, and a couple weeks later he was gone. And we're talking someone who's 40 years old. So I firmly always believe I need to be, the old saying, you got to act like you're going to live forever, and you also need to act like you're going to die today. There's got to be a both and as we're doing it. And so I want to be growing and learning. I want to make this my best year ever, knowing that it may be my last year ever, but I just want to make it a good one.
Reverend Jack Winkler, I don't know if any of you knew him. We celebrated his life, I guess just a week or 2 ago.
Yeah.
And he had been declining in health, but he celebrated a big birthday party this past summer, invited all of his family and friends to his house, and he came on Christmas Eve. And he came with his son and daughter, and you could tell that his physical health had taken, had started to decline, and yet his spirit was completely vibrant. You could tell that coming to church on Christmas Eve with his son and daughter meant the world. In fact, I think that they had planned attending a church service down in Norman to see the granddaughter, so they all went to church down there, and Jack was telling the son and daughter, who apparently thought that was going to be the family Christmas Eve service, and Jack said, that'll work out perfectly, because after we're done there, we'll have time to drive and be there for the 6:30 service at St. Luke's. And he came down at the end of the service, and we didn't know that would be the last time we saw him. And it was a good moment to see him again. You could tell the body was getting frail, and yet the spirit was living. And you could really say that he lived until he died, and then he died to go on to live evermore. And there really is something, whether you're young or old, to live in that moment and make the most of it.
So we're going to start tonight by looking at a passage from Isaiah. And I wanted to kind of, first of all, give you a little bit of feel about Isaiah, because Isaiah was back in 742 to about 687 BCE, so way back there. He lived in the southern kingdom of Judah, because you remember how we have the northern kingdom that's known as Israel, the southern kingdom known as Judah, where you have Jerusalem. At one time, it had all been Israel, and that was back during the times of King David and King Solomon. That's when you would have had one nation. It divided after Solomon, and we then had the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. So Isaiah would ultimately preach. He was the prophet down in the southern kingdom of Judah during that period. And so to kind of get a feel for it, let me just read you the first few verses here of the first chapter. Hear, O heavens, and give ear, O earth, for the Lord has spoken. Sons have I reared up and brought up, but they have rebelled against me. The ox knows its owner, and the ass its master's crib. But Israel does not know, my people does not understand. Ah, sinful nation, a people laden with iniquity, offspring of evildoers, sons who deal corruptly. They have forsaken the Lord, and they've despised the Holy One of Israel. They are utterly estranged. Why will you still be smitten that you continue to rebel? The whole head is sick, and the whole heart faint. Are you getting a feel of the Spirit here? Isaiah
Not a Hallmark card.
Isaiah is not happy with the people of Judah. He feels like they have forsaken the way of the Lord. So what's going on in the northern kingdom at this time is you have the Assyrians who have come, and they're now starting to attack the northern kingdom of Israel, and the northern kingdom of Israel will fall in 539. Oh, excuse me, actually in 722. It will be falling up in the northern kingdom of Israel will be taken over by the Assyrians. So many of the people there will be carried off to Assyria as well, but in the end, so many of the people are going to start getting assimilated. So, living in the shadow of the northern kingdom that now is controlled by the Assyrians is the people of Judah. And that'll go on for about 135 years. And they were always so afraid the Assyrians were going to come across the border. And you have Isaiah saying, if we don't straighten it up, the Assyrians are going to come down and we too will be punished. So, you have this spirit, you have Isaiah trying to call the people back to the way of the Lord, and then you're going to go on and we're going to wind up having after 135 years, you're going to have the southern kingdom of Judah is ultimately going to fall, but it's going to fall to the Babylonians, not to the Assyrians, but to the Babylonians. And the people of Israel are going to be now carted off by the Babylonians over into Babylon, and those who are left will mingle with the people of Babylon who get moved into the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. But the northern kingdom people who are still around now after the Assyrians are actually going to become, does anybody know who they become? The Samaritans. Who had that? Yeah, the Samaritans. That's who they become. And that's one of the reasons that when Jesus' day, they despised the Samaritans because they feel like they were Jews who did not maintain a true bloodline, and so they would despise them as you're not a part of the real kingdom of Israel. So that's where the Samaritans come from. So we're going to have the conquering of the southern kingdom of Judah. They too are going to get carried off. And I want to read you now Isaiah 40. Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and cry to her that her warfare is ended, that her iniquity is pardoned, that she's received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. A voice cries in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. For every valley shall be lifted up, and every mountain shall be made low, and the uneven ground shall become level, and the rough places a plain. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all the flesh shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. What a change, if you think about that, in spirit from what I was just reading you, Isaiah calling them into accountability. Look at how you're acting, and then suddenly it is, comfort, comfort my people. Scholars say that the first 1 through 39 is Isaiah, the original Isaiah. Starting in chapter 40, it's called Second Isaiah. We're talking it's probably 135 years to 185 years later that we now have a person who would have been in the school of Isaiah, if you will, a disciple who is now writing on in the spirit of Isaiah. But it's definitely two different time periods, two different authors, the original Isaiah, and then you have Second Isaiah. And does anybody recognize the passage I just wrote to you where else it might show up in the Bible? A voice cries in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make straight. Yeah, we're going to be talking about John the Baptist, his job of what he's going to wind up doing. So now we're talking suddenly, this is what gets quoted in the New Testament. Okay? So, a whole different kind of a spirit. So now we're in this Isaiah, the second Isaiah, who have been through a difficult time. And what I wanted to read you for tonight, our verse. I am the Lord, your Holy One, the Creator of Israel, your King. Thus says the Lord, who makes a way in the sea and a path in the mighty waters, who brings forth chariot and horse, army and warrior. They lie down, they cannot rise. They are extinguished, quenched like a wick. Remember not the former things, nor consider the things of old. Behold, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? I will make a way in the wilderness and the river in the desert. Behold, I'm doing a new thing, and it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? It's an exciting time to think for Israel It's a new thing. It is God who's going to lead us in a new way, into a new life. It is supposed to be this incredible word of hope. And I think that is the promise that comes down to us today. I perceive God is doing a new thing. God is doing a new thing. Do you not perceive it?
If you look to nature, there are new things built in the very fabric of what nature is. Think of what happens after a huge storm, a rainstorm. You'll often get a rainbow. Or you ever go out, especially in the summer or the spring, you go out after a big rain and you just breathe it in because everything smells cool and crisp and clean. It revitalizes you. There are things built into creation that emphasize newness. The first kind of flowers of spring, the baby animals that are born. But there are also rhythms of life, even the newness that we associate with spring itself. There's kind of a pattern of change throughout the year. Change is built in to our very lives. There's a constant change. I don't know if you ever watch any National Geographic documentaries, but there are a couple river systems in Africa that go through this kind of systemic change, where during the dry season they start to decrease less and less, and the animals are, doing what they can to survive. And so on the left side of this picture, you see all the hippos. You probably only see one or two prominent ones, but if you look past that one main hippo and you look behind it to the mounds, those are all hippos, and they're wallowing down in the mud because the river is drying up during the dry season. Versus new life when the rains come down. I have another picture of, I believe the elephant. This is the Zambezi River in Africa, and you can see which one's the dry season. Have you ever seen that documentary where they show the first rains that happened right after the dry season, and it just spreads, and you can see what happens in the plains surrounding the Zambezi River. Life comes again to the plains versus the times where the animals are really struggling. Elephants are able to seek out water when the riverbed is dry. They can still dig down deep and find it. But you have this kind of cyclic system of change in the very fabric of nature, of our lives, that sometimes we all go through those dry seasons, and we know that there's rain and refreshment and quenching coming, and then we just know that there's kind of this season. We go from spring to summer to fall to winter. We know spring's right around the corner. Sometimes we thought it a couple weeks ago. We thought winter's back. But we know there's constant change even in the fabric of nature. We see a church like St. Luke's, and one of our strengths is knowing that God is about newness, and God brings change in life, and we've always been a church family willing to embrace new things. We are a church family that follows God, and we understand that God works in these ways. And so if you look back throughout the history of St. Luke's, you can look back to our spirit of never saying we've never done it that way before, never kind of getting in a rut and just sitting there and wanting it to just be comfortable. When we were developing the money, raising money for this campus, for this downtown campus, the sanctuary, the building, we were moving from 8th and Robinson. This was considered the suburbs, and so we were raising money for it. And they would sell Beverly's fried chicken at the state fair. I can't think of any other way worse than that. If you ever go to the state fair, I can't even be near those. You know what it's like just even being around those kind of booths. It just emanates. The heat is just everywhere. And then to be, the oil, and every time I hear that story, I'm like, oh, God bless them. So they were doing that summer after summer. There would be classes and generations that they did this. And again, I just think that could be the worst time to do it. In the midst of that, so they're working towards this future. In the midst of that, they made a decision that they were going to take $25,000, even though they're raising money for this place. They took $25,000 to give to a church that 2 or 3 churches were merging to make a new church called Asbury on the south part of Oklahoma City. Now, $25,000 goes a long way to a church building. It's a lot of fried chicken to have to resell. And yet, the people of St. Luke's always had this spirit, okay, here is a new thing that God is calling us to, and we're willing to keep doing this. We went to Russia right after it opened.
Not everybody may know that, yes, we did in 1950 give this $25,000 to Asbury, and it is the Asbury that is now a part of St. Luke's. It is the South Campus, and it is where, from there, our food ministry is going throughout all of the city, but it is a hub of mission activity. It's been for after-school program for kids, and so the money we gave to help start a church is now back a part of the family of faith at St. Luke's because of what was done so long ago. Talk about that cycle of beginnings and endings. It really is just a beautiful thing and a beautiful place, without a doubt.
You might, some of you will probably also know that when that came into being, there was a worshiping congregation there, and we worked very hard with them, and they had their worship service, they had classes, and in the midst of COVID, the nature of that group, they weren't able to get out during COVID. And so that worshiping congregation really ended, and we grieved that because no one, especially a pastor, never likes to see a worship service end. But after COVID, we saw all the mission things really grow at the Asbury campus. And a few months ago, there was a pastor who approached us, and he is part of an evangelical Episcopal church association. And they asked if they could rent our worship space. And they were very familiar with all of our food ministries. They said if they could rent, could they also volunteer and help out with all of our missions there? And so they have been hard at work renovating and putting in new screens and whatnot. They've probably put in over $180,000 to the Asbury building, including all new security systems, not just for around their sanctuary equipment, but throughout the whole building, especially the parts around the kitchen to help protect the food ministry programs. And so now is this developing partnership, and they have a vibrant worship congregation, and they really do ministry with some people that have experienced some of the most hard moments in life. They're in recovery, they're helping them and doing great things. And so again, God is always about doing these kind of new things. We saw that when we started the new campus in Edmond, and I don't know if any of you have ever visited there. I hope you do, because you can feel like St. Luke's there. It has that same common feel, and yet it has a different look. It's a very different setting. We're getting ready to start talking about going back to Africa. We had just started scouting out a new kind of connectional ministry with the people in Africa, and then COVID, and so we decided not to go back during that time, but we're getting ready to gear that back up again because we believe in some of these new projects and new missions that God is all about.
Kisumu, Kenya. Let me tell you, it's neat people, neat things that are happening and going on. It's going to be a wonderful a wonderful thing we do. Just like what we were doing when we went to Russia, and still supporting our churches there in Russia. Reverend Linda Harker, every Monday morning, FaceTimes the new pastor in Ulyanovsk as a true mentor of what are the issues you're facing, and what are you, how would you handle this, and how do you handle that? And so our connection with what we do in Russia goes on. This is the 30th year. Then it continues to go on, and we're finding the new ways to be evolving with them. And it is the special thing that I believe actually happens here at St. Luke's when we are open to let God lead us into the future, into those kinds of new ways. So what happens? Why do we sometimes stop being open to changing? Some of you will know the name Mike Lazaridis. Fascinating man, and Mike is an incredibly brilliant person. He actually was born in Istanbul, Turkey, and both of his mom and dad were Greek. And when he was only 5 years old, they moved to Canada, Ontario, and settled into Ontario, and that's where he was growing up. When he was in junior high, and now you're talking back in the 1960s or so. When you're back in junior high, he loved science projects, and he managed to build a solar panel that actually worked. Now, this is before DIY solar panels or anything else. I mean, he literally figured it out, and with the things he had, made it work. He loved to read so much in science that for his school that he was attending in the library, he literally read every science book in the library. That's what he would do for fun. In high school, he wound up building a computer. Now we're talking again, early stages of computers. When he was in high school, he built his own computer. He was really good at working with TVs, so much so that his teachers, if they had a problem with their television set, they brought it to school to Mike, who would fix their TV because he was that good and they knew what he was doing. So, I mean, he was a man who was incredibly gifted with a brilliant mind and so innovative in the things that he could do. He went to college to get a degree in electrical engineering, and when he finally graduated from college, his first invention was a barcoder. I mean, we all know about barcoders now since we ought to check ourselves out at the grocery store. But he had a barcoder that was actually designed for working with movies, films, timing, what are you trying to do? And it was so helpful to the movie industry that he actually won an Oscar for technical achievement. And we're talking about a guy in his young 20s. Winning an Oscar for technical achievement and what you're doing to literally change the making of films. But it was his next invention that was the most amazing. An invention that people like Bill Gates and to Christina Aguilar, they both had it and loved it. To Oprah Winfrey, who would say, it has changed my life. To Barack Obama, who refused to give it up to the Secret Service when he was elected president. What he invented was the BlackBerry. So it's kind of the forerunner of smartphones. And I remember when my brother got his BlackBerry, and I didn't have one, and he knew he was far better than his brother. I got my BlackBerry. I mean, that was just the cool thing. And the BlackBerry, it had a screen, but you would type with your thumbs, and that was just kind of the new thing. Type with your thumbs, have a keyboard, and if you had one, they were not cheap. That was so cool for being able to send emails, messages, and that sort of thing. It's even before texting that he'd come out with these. So he is really the father of smartphones, if you will. So it was a device for sending and receiving emails. Incredibly successful. But in 2007, something else came out. The iPhone came out in 2007. And when the iPhone came out, Mike got one, and he took it apart. And when he took, because he just, got kind of a mind, you want to know what's in there. Took it apart, and he exclaimed, "Goodness gracious," that's my words for him. He opened up, they put a Mac computer in there. And his response was, "Why would anybody want that?" He really saw absolutely no reason that anybody would want a computer in a phone. Why would anybody want something called an app for entertainment or being able to go to things? That makes no sense. So this is in 2007. Back in 2005, his engineers had come to Mike and said, "Why don't we put a browser on our phone?" And he said, "No one is going to want to go to the internet on their phone." So he refused to let the engineers go forward putting a browser on his BlackBerry. He refused to say, "We're not going to put a computer on here with apps for any kind of entertainment." That his whole belief was, "I've already designed the perfect thing." So his goal was to say, we're going to keep it as it is. 2009, so that's just 2 years after the iPhone had come out, 2009, he had 50% of the smartphone market. The BlackBerry did 50% of the phone market. The company was valued at $70 billion. Mike had done pretty well for himself as a young man who was so smart back in high school and then college and come up with these inventions. What we sometimes don't realize is the world is still changing. It is always changing. And I don't know if you were around when we did a sermon series, I don't know how many years ago now, 4 or 5 years ago, and it was "Thank You for Being Late." And it was about a book that was looking at as the title of the book, and it was all about how the world is changing, but not just changing, the rate of change is going faster than ever before. Like, how long did it take for medical knowledge to improve? And they were showing it usually would increase every 30 years. And then it would double again every 15 years. And then it was going to be every 5 years. And so, yes, the world is always changing, but the rate of change is staggering. The technology that keeps changing that you and I have, and if you're going to exist in doing the world the way the world goes, you have to embrace some of it. I would think everybody here has a smartphone, cell phone of some sort. I know that you do because when we go out to restaurants or we go to the airport, I will look around. Every single person has one out and is on it. I mean, it's unbelievable. I was at a place having lunch just recently and walked in, and here came a young couple, and bringing in a little baby. They came in and they sat down. And then a few minutes later, got up. I was going to go to the restroom. I came back. Both of them are on their phones. There is no conversation. The baby's there beside them. And I thought, yep, that's the world. We're on our phones. We're not looking. We're not talking. But everybody has them, and you have to have them to know what's going on in the world. So, technology is happening. It is changing rapidly, rapidly. Mike didn't change. He knew he'd already designed this incredible device, $70 billion corporation of value, 50% of the smartphone market. 5 years later, 5 years, the iPhone was now out. It had come out 7 years before. It only took a little time to start getting traction. In 2014, the BlackBerry accounted for 1% of the market. In 5 years, to go from 50% of the market to 1% of the market. Apparently people did want a computer in their phone and the apps and all that sort of thing. What really had caught my attention and brought me back to this story was it was almost 1 year ago right now, they turned off the final service to BlackBerry phones. So that if you still had one, there had been some support for you to be able to use, and that was turned off now, and it's a cool relic to have in your house that's truly not worth anything. Cannot be used, but it's fun to see you had one. And they were expensive, but they are worthless. So the whole idea of we get to a place and you get something, whether it's a device or just your own life, and we get so comfortable with it that we don't want to change. But the world is always changing. I believe that right now, one of the things that the church is really going to be having to confront is how are we going to relate better to those who are 20 years old? Every year, when we come to the end of the year, we look at those who've joined the church. This last year, we had 277 new members, which was outstanding. We have 250 to 300 join every year, decade in and decade out. Very consistent growth. What I always like to do is I always like to go back and then say, what were the age categories of who was joining the church? Because just quite honestly, one of the things I'm always concerned about is I never want the church to reflect the pastor's age category. I did come when I was 37. We've kind of moved on along up that ladder a little bit now during that time, but I don't want only people who are going to be in their 60s and 70s or 80s to be joining the church. I'm glad we have those, but I want to make sure we always are up and down. So we go back and we kind of break it into categories and say, how are we doing? And when we did that this year, what we found was consistent with what we have found every year for more than a decade, 20 years maybe. That is, we found that 50% of everyone who joined the church was 49 and under. 50% who joined the church were 50 and up. If you break it into decades, we had a strong confirmation class, so the kids who are 12 to 19, the percentage was, 14, 15% of the total new members were in that category. If you jump to the 30s, it was like 13%. The 40s, 15%. 50s, if you went along each one of those decades, it was always plus or minus 13, 14, 15%. From the 80s, the 70s, the 60s, the 50s, except the 20s. And we had like 6 in the 20s. And boy, it raises a red flag. When you have people in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, but such a small group in the 20s. As we look at that and we look at studies, we know that that's an issue across the nation for all churches. That we're not reaching the 20-year-olds as we tend to be reaching the other decades. So we have a strong belief here at St. Luke's. Look at the most brutal facts of the current reality. And have an undying faith you will be successful. We believe we will be successful in carrying out the mission in the world because with God all things are possible. We are trying to follow God into the future, and so we do believe, yes, we will be successful at finding a way to reach the 20-year-olds. As we looked at the numbers to go, there's a problem. What do we do for the future? How do we, and so the question becomes, how do you do something new? And what are you doing new to be reaching the kids, the teenagers? I mean, if this came out in 2007.
Not that model.
Not this model, no, I did. Let's see, I would have been over 50 years old. So when suddenly I'm getting an iPhone, you look at my grandkids, and one of them is up to 18, the world that they've grown up in and their familiarity. Okay, how do you teach the Bible stories to kids who are 14, 15, who've never known anything but this kind of technology in their world? It is why we're doing something new. It's why we have contracted right now to be creating virtual reality stories of the Bible. If you're not familiar with virtual reality, you can put on what's called an Oculus headset, and you put it on, and suddenly you are in the experience. Wherever it is, you can look up, you can look down, look over the side, you look behind you. You are in the environment, and not fake environment. I mean, it's like what you'd be seeing here in the world. I'm just sorry, I'm having fun with this one, but what we're looking at doing is the technology is getting developed there, that where Tom is sitting, I just think that'd be a great place. Where Tom is sitting, we're going to create a cutout of Tom and put it right there. And we'll have the camera embedded into that person sitting there. And we'll give it 180 degrees, because we didn't want to go 360. We want to give you 180 degrees. You'll be sitting there, and you can sit at home and put on your Oculus headsets, and you will be in church. Look up, down, around. You will be immersed completely in the environment. The sound will almost be what you feel. And we'll have several around the sanctuary. Maybe you like the balcony more than you do down front. And you'll be able to be anywhere in the world and literally be at St. Luke's. And not just seeing it flat on a screen. I mean, you're there. It's the most interesting experience. Well, at the moment, so we're looking at this in the future. What do you do? How do we find this way to make this work? Well, right now we're creating our very first video, and we decided the best way for creating something new, our video is of the resurrection. And it's going to be of the morning when Mary and Mary show up at the tomb, and Jesus is ascending into heaven and speaks to the women and tells them to go to the disciples, and I'll meet you on the sea in Galilee, and you will literally be at the tomb. If you want to go in, you can go in the tomb. You'll follow the women.
It's empty. You don't have to.
Oh, that's right. Okay. Nothing to see in there, is there now? Okay. So you'll be able to go to the tomb, and then you'll go to the Sea of Galilee, and I mean, you'll be at the Sea of Galilee. And when you go up onto the mountain where Jesus is, you're going to be up to where you feel like literally you're on top of a mountain. So it's an incredible technology. Again, when my grandkids, Marcia and I got a couple of Oculus headsets just because we're so cool. We weren't sure how to make them work, but the grandkids came to see us, and so now they work, and we enjoy them. And so, I mean, they loved them. And their first comment was after they'd been here and they'd played with them and made them work, so we were very grateful. They got to leave and said, "Can we take these home with us?" And I said, "No." They're going to be right here. And anytime you want to come see us, you can play with them. So we are going to be doing this to where in our children and youth department, but I guarantee you, adults are going to want to do it as well. If you've ever been to the Museum of the Bible, anybody been to the Museum of the Bible? Okay, I know Tom and I were talking about this the other night. They have Oculus headsets where you can go and take a tour of the Holy Land. And so you put them on, you sit down, and you literally are in the Holy Land. The feeling is incredible. So we're going to try to create a video of Easter with the belief that if our children come and they experience Easter, rather than just hear the story of Easter, but you experience Easter, they'll have a better chance of remembering the Scripture story all their life because it becomes a part of them. And we hope to have Mary and Joseph, where you're with Mary and Joseph heading to Bethlehem by Christmas. And we'll just keep on trying to produce these, telling the stories of the Bible in a whole new way. So that's part of what the fun is going to be. Are you open to being creative, to letting God use us in new ways? And that's this part. But what we're also going to say right now is, are you doing it in your own personal life? Are you open to experience something new, to try something new, to change in some way, so that whether this be your last year or no, you will make it your best?
You probably heard the quote, there is nothing constant except change. That was by a Greek philosopher by the name of Heraclitus back in 500 to 600 BCE. And there's real truth to it. He had a philosophy of the world continually being in change. And I think if we embrace that more, it wouldn't stress us out as much. But we have come to the time throughout history that things have gotten really comfortable. I mean, you don't have to leave your chair at home, and you can orchestrate every electronic from your chair. And we kind of like that comfort. A study just came out this past Monday. It was in the Journal of Epidemiology and Community Health. And it talked about the effect of vigorous exercise on your brain. And they looked at 6 to 9 minutes of vigorous exercise, and they showed that it improved cognitive performance, especially around planning and organization. Just 6 to 9 minutes of vigorous exercise every day helps your brain. And so that was a great result. I don't think it shocks any of us. What was really surprising was the opposite. If instead of 6 to 9 minutes of exercise, you replace that with 6 to 9 minutes of some sedentary activity, which I always think sedentary activity seems like an oxymoron. But if you have 6 to 9 minutes of just sitting or resting or sleeping, they found that there was a 1 to 2% cognitive decline. So getting in a rut can literally harm your health. We need to live as if we are always preparing ourselves for change. There's a great book. I don't know if any of you have read it. We've talked about it in sermons, but it's probably been a few years. And the book is entitled The Unthinkable: Who Survives When Disaster Strikes and Why? And they have several accounts of people in the midst of different disasters that occurred. And one of the most important factors on whether you live or die, of course, it depends on the disaster and what happens and where you are, but they found a high percentage of your ability to survive was based on how you react. They would find that there would be a percentage of people that as soon as something happened, they got up and did something. And they would find people that in the midst of the most scary, frightening tragedy, they would sit back and not try to escape, not try to improve their situation. There was a very famous dinner club on the Kentucky border that many years ago they had this tremendous fire. And at the end of it, the firefighters went back in and they found people who had burned to death sitting at the tables where they had been. They were so overwhelmed, they couldn't bring themselves to do anything. There was one account in particular of a woman, Elena Cardenas. Oh, you see the little question mark? I'll tell you what that means in just a second. On the left-hand side is the World Trade Center in 1993. She was coming down. She was a young, newly hired employee that worked there. She was coming down the elevator, and it stopped. And she felt kind of this rumble, and she was stuck there with some other people, and the explosion had just happened. And so she got out of that, and she obviously survived, and she was at work a week later. And so she had had this experience. She continued to work there, and she was there. The picture should show the Twin Towers. She was there in Tower 1 when the first plane hit, and it hit just 11 floors above her. And this was different. It wasn't just a little rumble. She felt the whole building sway to the side. And she said, even in that moment, I knew that a tragedy could happen and happen to that building and happen to me. And she said, she confessed, but in that moment, I couldn't believe that it was going to happen again. And so she did nothing. She couldn't change, she couldn't react to the different situation until finally people let her out and she survived that. But she looks back and she talked about becoming prepared for change. And this author, Amanda Ripley, who wrote this book, talked about talking to survivors, and she would talk to groups of survivors, and over again, she expected them to talk about the kind of the emotions of the moment and what they were feeling and calling their families and trying to help others. And what they would say over and over is they wanted everybody to know you need to act and react in the midst of a tragedy, because what they saw was so many of their friends and colleagues who didn't. And so being prepared for change, it's healthier for you. It can save your life. And we know that change is part of the fabric of life. Day in and day out, we're going to face change. We shouldn't run to the comfortable, kind of the easy rut, but instead be open to the newness of life that God brings, whether we're in a time of the comfort's really good or we're in a time that we kind of hunker down because we're really frightened. God brings newness of life, whatever we need, whether it's kind of we are delivered from a painful time or we are challenged to help others in their time of need. God will always bring newness, and it's our call to respond to that.
Behold, I'm doing a new thing. Do you see it? To have dreams, to be open to doing things in new ways. Today I was visiting with our bishop, and we were talking about the state of the church throughout the United States and the world, and of course the state of the Methodist Church. And we were discussing that very issue of what does it mean to say we're going to do some new things? It's just the reality. We have to do some new things in order to be the viable church in the world. And it was fun having that discussion and talking about what does it mean to dream new dreams? And what do those dreams wind up looking like? And you either shrink back from them in fear, or you believe that truly God is the one who's going to make the rivers run in the desert and the things to bloom. And so as you start 2023, I hope you've taken the time to be looking at your own life and thinking about what are the goals? What are the dreams? What new things do you want to learn? What things do you want to experience? Where's God going to lead you? You know, one of my favorite stories is of Hans Ludwig Babslinger. Hans Ludwig, back from the 1500s. He actually lived in the town of Ulm, Germany, and there in the Bavarian foothills, he was a artificial limb maker. And back in the 1500s, since we didn't have antibiotics, amputation was a very common thing that was taking place. And so there was lots of need for different kinds of limbs for help people continue to go on with life. And so he was actually incredibly skilled maker with his hands in his workshop. But Hans, more than wanting to just build limbs, he wanted to fly. And he kept watching the birds fly, and he thought, I could do that, I just need a pair of wings. He had the ability to start making them. And so he made a pair of wings, and he would get out there. That's not Hans from the 1500s, but that's the idea. So Hans made himself a pair of wings, and he got out there in the foothills there in Bavaria, and he would kind of get high up on the hill, run and leap, and it was perfect for the updraft of the winds coming there. And goodness gracious, I mean, he wasn't exactly flying long distances, but he became a hang glider. I mean, he literally was able to fly. And people do this all the time today, but not 1,500 years ago. And so Hans Bablinger there in Ulm, Germany, is one of the earliest hang gliders that we know of, who literally had made himself a pair of wings, could run down and jump up and then kind of come on down the hill, which was, needless to say, can you imagine the 1500s, and you look up and go, oh, there's Hans flying. I mean, talk about blow your mind. It's like, oh my goodness, Hans can fly. Well, he was having a great time. People were pretty impressed with that. 1594, King Ludwig is coming to town in Ulm, Germany. And since the king is coming to town, Ulm wanted to impress the king. We're pretty cool people around here. Well, how do you impress the king? We got Hans right here. He flies. And the king's going, I'd love to see that. But he is the king. You don't want to make him travel out from town, out into the foothills somewhere to see this. The Danube River flows right through the town. They have a real nice bluff there in town. They said, why don't you just fly off the bluff here? And so Hans said, well, of course, I'm happy to do that. There's a problem. The bluffs tend to have a downdraft. The foothills have an updraft. So you can be up on the foothills and you can run and leap off and, yep, there's that updraft and I got my wings and I actually get a lift. Well, the big day comes, the king is sitting down there by the river and he now represents Ulm and he gets up on the bluff. I'm like, yes, ready. He jumps off and, of course, he comes down like a rock straight into the river. Hans doesn't fly. King's not impressed. The town's embarrassed. That Sunday in church, the bishop gets up and calls Hans by name.
He survived.
He did survive. Yes, he survived.
Detail. So.
Yes. Oh, I wouldn't tell a bad story where he dies. So Hans shows up in church, and the bishop calls out his name and goes, Hans Bablinger, the sin of pride. You aren't meant to fly. You are not God. Called him out, reamed him out in front of everybody. You've embarrassed us all. Hans goes home to his workshop and is never seen again. He goes home with his broken wings and his broken dreams, and it's not long after that he dies. Everybody needs dreams. To be open to new, Behold, I am doing a new thing, the Lord said. Do you not perceive it? Let God do something new in your life. Let God do something new in our life together. It's what makes life worth living, and we grow. Have a great week. We'll see you next week. Let God do something new in our life together. It's what makes life worth living, and we grow. Have a great week. We'll see you next week.